Theodore II Doukas Laskaris or Ducas Laskaris, Greek, Romanized, Theodoros Doukas Laskaris, 1221 or 1222 to the 16th of August, 1258, was Emperor of Nicaea from 1254 to 1258. He was the only child of Emperor John III Doukas Vatatzes and Empress Irene Laskarina. His mother was the eldest daughter of Theodore I Laskaris, who had established the Empire of Nicaea as a successor state to the Byzantine Empire in Asia Minor after the Crusaders captured the Byzantine capital, Constantinople, during the Fourth Crusade in 1204. Theodore received an excellent education from two renowned scholars, Nicephorus Blemides and George Acropolites. He made friends with young intellectuals, especially with a page of low birth, George Maussolon. Theodore began to write treatises on theological, historical and philosophical themes in his youth. Miniature of Theodore II from the manuscript of Georgius Passionae's Historia, 14th century. Regarding Theodore II Doukas Laskaris, he was emperor and autocrat of the Romans. Regarding his title as Emperor of Nicaea, his reign was from the 4th of November, 1254 to the 16th of August, 1258. His acclamation was 1235 as co-emperor. His predecessor was John III Vatatzes. His successor was John IV Laskaris. He was born 1221 or 1222 in Nicaea, now Iznik, Bursa, Turkey. He died the 16th of August, 1258, aged 36 or 37, in Magnesia, now Tikin, Aydın, Turkey. His spouse was Elena of Bulgaria. His issues were Irene Doukaina Laskarina, Eudoxia Laskarina, and John IV Laskaris including more. His name was Theodore Doukas Laskaris. His houses were Laskaris, matrilineal, and Vatatzes, patrilineal. His father was John III Doukas Vatatzes. His mother was Irene Laskarina. Emperor John III arranged for Theodore to marry Elena Asenina in 1235, to forge an alliance with her father, Ivan Asen II, Emperor of Bulgaria, against the Latin Empire of Constantinople. According to Theodore himself, their marriage was happy, and they had 5 or 6 children. From 1241, Theodore acted as his father's lieutenant in Asia Minor during his frequent military campaigns in the Balkan Peninsula. From around 1242, he was his father's co-ruler, but was not crowned as co-emperor. During this period, his relationship with some prominent aristocrats, particularly Theodore Phils and Michael Palaiologos, grew tense. Theodore succeeded his father on the 4th of November, 1254. He dismissed many high officials and army commanders of aristocratic origin, replacing them with loyal friends, including some of low birth. The same year, he made a defensive alliance with Kaikos II, the Seljuk Sultan of Rum, against the Mongol Empire. In 1256, he repelled a Bulgarian invasion of Thrace and Macedonia, and forced Michael II Komnenos Doukas, the ruler of Epirus, to cede Dyrrhachium on the coast of the Adriatic Sea to Nicaea. He reformed the military, recruiting more soldiers from among the native peasantry of Asia Minor. Eventually, Michael II of Epirus forged an alliance with Stefan Euro I, King of Serbia, and Manfred of Sicily against Nicaea. Theodore's newly appointed generals could not resist their joint invasion in 1257. Theodore fell seriously ill and could rarely take part in state administration during the last months of his life. He appointed George Maussolon regent for his underage son, John IV, before dying of either chronic epilepsy or cancer. In 10 days, Maussolon fell victim to an aristocratic plot, and Michael Palaiologos assumed the regency, usurping the throne soon after. Theodore was born to Emperor John III Doukas Vatatzes, reigned 1221 to 1254, and Irene Laskarina in the imperial palace in Nicaea in late 1221 or early 1222. Irene was the eldest daughter of Theodore I Laskaris, reigned 1205 to 1221, the founder of the Empire of Nicaea. Nicaea was a successor state of the Byzantine Empire, established after the Catholic, Latin, Crusaders captured Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade in 1204. Vatatzes was Irene's third husband. He was born into a Byzantine aristocratic family related to the imperial dynasties of Komnenos and Angelos, and served as the commander of the imperial guard. Although Irene's two brothers had died prematurely, Theodore I did not name Vatatzes as his official heir. He most likely expected that his third wife, the Latin Maria of Courtenay, would bear sons, but he did not father children with her. Theodore I died in November 1221. Vatatzes had to defeat the late emperor's brothers, Alexius and Isaac Laskaris, to seize the throne. His victory over them and their Latin allies in the Battle of Poimanon in the winter of 1223 to 1224 opened the way for the reconquest of Byzantine territories lost to the Latins in Asia Minor. Theodore was his parents' only child. His mother had been in a horse-riding accident and could not bear children after his birth. He adopted his mother's family name. He was raised as usual for a royal child, according to his own words, most probably referring to his upbringing in the women's quarter of the palace, and the luxury surrounding him. His childhood was joyful, and he often received greatest solace from his father. He also remembered his parents did not punish him when his tutor had accused him of misdemeanors. Ruins of the walls of Nicaea, now Iznik in Turkey. Theodore was probably entrusted to an elementary teacher's care in 1228, as most Nicaean aristocratic children's formal education began around the age of 6. As part of his education, he memorized texts from the Bible and prayed 3 times a day. He could quote from the Psalms and the parables of Jesus by heart until the end of his life. Theodore's secondary education began around 1230. He detested his principal tutor, or Bialos, and described him as a great babbler in his works, without mentioning his name. He studied grammar, that is Attic Greek, poetry, rhetoric, logic, mathematics, astronomy, geometry, and music for 3 years. His grammatical studies raised his lifelong interest in words, with multiple meanings, and in etymologies. The young Theodore was captivated by the orations of Demosthenes and Hermogenes of Tarsus. He also held theologian Gregory of Nazianzus in high esteem. His tutor mocked him for philosophizing and urged Theodore to spend more time with military and diplomatic studies. Theodore was a passionate hunter and polo player with remarkable riding skills. Negotiations over Theodore's marriage with Elena Asnina began shortly after the Battle of Klokotnitsa, where Elena's father, Emperor, or Tsar, Ivan Asen II of Bulgaria, reigned 1218 to 1241, inflicted a crushing defeat on the Emperor of Thessalonica and ruler of Epirus, Theodore Komnenos Doukas, reigned 1215 to 1230. The battle weakened Epirus Thessalonica, Nicaea's western rival for the revival of the Byzantine Empire, and made Bulgaria the dominant power of the Balkan Peninsula. The marriage of Theodore and Elena sealed their father's alliance against the Latin Empire of Constantinople in 1235. In the same year, Bulgarian and Nicaean troops laid siege to Constantinople, but could not capture the city. In 1237, Ivan Asen then reversed his position, allying himself with the Latins to stop Nicaean expansion in Thrace, only to return to his alliance with Nicaea before the end of the year. His father-in-law's tactical moves convinced Theodore that he could not fully trust the Bulgarians, a view he held for the rest of his life. Theodore took philosophy classes from a most renowned teacher, Nicephorus Blemmyds. As Blemmyds was the hegumenos, abbot, of a monastery at Ephesus, Theodore attended his classes while he was staying in his father's winter palace at nearby Nymphion. Blemmyds' zealous Aristotelianism had a strong impact on Theodore, who often mentioned Aristotelian notions, like potentiality and actuality, in his writings. Blemid's was accused of embezzlement by one of his students early in the 1240s. Although Vatatzes' intervention saved him from imprisonment, he abandoned teaching. Theodore continued to visit Blemid's regularly and maintained a correspondence with him. A young scholar, George Acropolites, replaced Blemid's as Theodore's principal tutor. Born in Constantinople, Acropolites had first-hand experience with the Latin rule in the city. He completed Theodore's education in logic and mathematics. Also a historian, Acropolites would complete the most detailed chronicle of the Empire of Nicaea. Theodore's mother died late in 1239. Vatatzes remarried in late summer of 1240, taking an illegitimate daughter of Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor, reigned 1220 to 1250, Constanza, whose name was changed to Anna. She was around 10 and Vatatzes started a scandalous affair with one of her Italian ladies-in-waiting, named Marchesina. She was granted the right to wear purple shoes, and to harness her horse, with purple trappings, like the emperor's closest relatives. Fifteenth-century portrait of John III Vatatzes, from the Mutinensis Graecus 122. If Vatatzes followed the practice of his predecessors, Theodore was proclaimed co-ruler while still a child. In his history, Acropolites mentioned Theodore as a co-emperor when narrating events that occurred from 1235 to 1237 and in 1242. In his correspondence, Theodore referred to himself as My Imperial Majesty from around 1242. He was not crowned during his father's lifetime, a likely explanation for the denial of his co-emperorship by two later Byzantine historians, George Passionaires and Nicephorus Grigoras. Theodore's authority was considerable. He granted estates and salaries, and intervened in legal disputes. On Blemid's petition, he ordered Nicephorus, the metropolitan bishop of Ephesus, to return an allegedly unlawfully purchased piece of land to Blemid's monastery. During his father's absence, he presided over sessions of the Privy Council, and proposed candidates to vacant church offices. John III Vatatzes again laid siege to Constantinople in May 1241, but he quickly realized he could not capture the city. He started peace negotiations, and Theodore accompanied his father to the meetings with the Latin envoys. They signed a 2-year truce on the 24th of June. Ivan II Asen died in the same month, and his death weakened Bulgaria. Vatatzes launched a military campaign against the Bulgarians' Epirote allies late in 1241. Before departing for the military campaign, he appointed Theodore his lieutenant in Asia Minor. Theodore, like his father and grandfather, held an itinerant court, and visited most Nicaean towns and villages in Anatolia. At this time, a Mongol general, Beju, invaded Nicaea's eastern neighbor, the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, from the east, and captured Aturum. Theodore informed his father, who was besieging Thessalonica, but Vatatzes did not abandon the siege. His persistence was rewarded when the ruler of Thessalonica John Komnenos Doukas, reigned 1237 to 1244, renounced the title of emperor in return for the Byzantine court title of despot from Vatatzes. The Mongols launched a new military campaign against the Seljuks, and routed Sultan Kayk Khosrow II, reigned 1237 to 1246, at the Battle of Kosta on the 26th of June, 1243. After the Seljuks agreed to pay a yearly tribute to the Mongols, Nicaea remained the only Anatolian state that preserved full independence. The fear of a Mongol invasion became a constant element of Nicaean diplomacy. Vatatzes again charged Theodore with the administration of Asia Minor when he launched a new military campaign in Thrace in 1246. After Vatatzes captured Serres, the leading citizens of Thessalonica did not risk a prolonged siege. They opened the gates of their city, and paid voluntary homage to Vatatzes. As most Macedonian towns followed their example, Vatatzes almost doubled his empire's territory. Theodore forged a bond of close friendship with a circle of young intellectuals. All born after the Latin conquest of Constantinople, they did not experience the shock of exile, unlike many of their fathers' humiliated generation, as Patriarch Germanus II of Constantinople referred to them. His friend's companionship helped Theodore come through his periods of melancholy, likely caused by anxiety over his public duties. His closest friend, George Maussolon, was a page in his retinue during their childhood. The three Maussolon brothers, George, Theodore, and Andronikos, were, in Blemid's words, of despicably low birth, but they were talented singers and musicians. Most of Theodore's other confidants, like Joseph Mesopotamites and Constas Hasia Theodorites, were related to high-ranking officials and churchmen. His fellows often teased Theodore for his style of reasoning during philosophical discussions. His friends' mockery upset him, but critical remarks made by bishops and aristocrats were more dangerous to his reputation. Metropolitan Nicephorus of Ephesus rebuked him for his pride and for his non-observance of the rules of fasting. The governor of Thessalonica, Theodore Phils, circulated defamatory poems about Theodore's alleged affair with an unnamed woman. Phils's accusations reached the ears of Blemids, and Theodore could not convince his former tutor of his innocence. Blemids did not tolerate sexual misconduct, and completed a Mirror for Princes instruction, entitled Imperial Statue, warning both Theodore and his father against lechery. On the other hand, Theodore often made fun of bishops for their self-aggrandizement, their barbaric speech or ignorantly heretical statements, or even for their physical appearance. Vatatzes was making preparations for a new attack on Constantinople in the spring of 1252, but the ruler of Epirus, Michael II Komnenos Doukas, reigned 1230 to 1266 or 68, invaded Nicaean territory in Macedonia. Vatatzes appointed Theodore his viceroy in Asia Minor and launched a counterattack against Michael II, forcing him to return to Epirus. Elena of Bulgaria died unexpectedly of unknown causes before the end of August. Theodore mourned his wife for more than the customary 40 days. He abandoned fasting and wearing black only on his father's command. His wife's death intensified Theodore's melancholy. He secluded himself in the palace and dedicated his time to philosophical studies and writing. He only resumed his regular visits to the towns of Asia Minor in 1253. Early in 1253, Emperor Frederick II's son and successor, Conrad, reigned 1250 to 1254, forced most relatives of his father's mistress, Bianca Lancia, into exile. They fled to Nicaea and sought asylum from Bianca's daughter, Empress Constanza Anna. Since his father was staying in Thrace, the exiles were received by Theodore. Conrad changed his mind and sent the erudite Berthold of Hohenberg, an in-law of the Lancias, to Nicaea to begin negotiations with them. While waiting for his father's return from Thrace, Theodore had philosophical conversations with Hohenberg. The study of ancient Greek philosophers had intensified in Europe, and Hohenberg asked Theodore for Greek philosophical works. This request reinforced Theodore's pride in the Greeks' ancient heritage, and he decided to publish his own works. Vatatzes returned to Nicaea in the winter of 1253. Early in 1254, he fell ill suddenly and never fully recovered. His illness made Theodore the actual ruler of the empire. Vatatzes was still alive when news of the Mongols' preparations for a new invasion of Asia Minor reached Nicaea. High papyron of Theodore II issued during his first regnal year, depicting him alongside the Virgin Mary. John III Vatatzes died in Nicaea on the 4th of November, 1254, leaving a flourishing empire to Theodore. Theodore was acclaimed emperor, but he was not crowned because the patriarchal throne was vacant. In his funerary speech, at Vatatzes' burial, Acropolites expressed his hope that Theodore would lead the Nicaeans to expel the Latins from Constantinople, comparing him with the pillar of fire of the book of Exodus, guiding the Israelites. Theodore could not risk launching an attack against Constantinople, because his empire was surrounded by hostile powers. Theodore forbade his father's widow, Anna Constanza, from returning to her Sicilian homeland. This act outraged her brother, Manfred, reigned 1258 to 1266, who had recently assumed power in the Kingdom of Sicily. Theodore had a meeting with the Seljuk Sultan of Rum, Caicos II, reigned 1246 to 1262, in Philadelphia. They concluded a defensive alliance against the Mongols. Caicos had acknowledged the Mongols' suzerainty, but had not visited the court of Great Khan Munk to pay homage to him. Theodore wanted to make Blemides the new patriarch, but his old tutor refused. His next candidate, a hermit with an aristocratic background, Arsenios Autorianos, accepted the offer. The new patriarch crowned and anointed Theodore emperor on Christmas 1254. According to sources hostile to Arsenios, he was Theodore's sole nominee to the patriarchal throne, although tradition required the presentation of 3 candidates to the electors. Arsenios' allegedly irregular appointment would give rise to the conflict known as the Arsenicism, lasting from 1265 to 1310. Arsenios was always Theodore's loyal supporter, and obeyed his commands. Theodore did not trust the aristocrats, and wrote of illicit love affairs, and very unjust plots, without naming his opponents, in a letter addressed to George Maussolon in December 1254. The historian Michael Angold proposes that Emperor Frederick II's similar policy may have inspired Theodore's more autocratic stance towards his aristocracy. Theodore appointed George Maussolon to be the new Megas Domestikos, or commander-in-chief, of the mobile army. George's brother, Andronikos, was designated as the new Protovestiarites, commander of the guards of the imperial palace. Theodore also demonstrated his favor towards a general of common origin, Constantine Margarites. He offered offices to some aristocrats who had been put aside during his father's reign. He recalled his mother's uncles, Michael and Manuel Laskaris, from their exile, and made 2 members of the rebellious Nestungos family, George and Isaac, generals. His appointments offended most aristocrats. The young Bulgarian Tsar, Michael II Asen, reigned 1246 to 1256 or 57, took advantage of Vatatzes' death to reconquer the lands he had seized from Bulgaria after 1241. Michael invaded Macedonia and Thrace in December 1254 or January 1255. Most Nicaean garrisons in the local fortresses were small, and the local Bulgarians supported the invaders. The Bulgarians quickly seized most Thracian fortresses. 2 Macedonian towns, Vels and Skopje, also surrendered to them. A hastily summoned council of war accepted George Maussolon's proposal of an immediate counterattack. Theodore decided to lead the campaign himself, and entrusted Maussolon with the administration of Asia Minor in February 1255. His surprise attack forced the invaders to withdraw from Thrace, and he ordered 2 Nicaean aristocrats, Alexios Strategopoulos and Demetrios Tournaikes, to pursue the Bulgarians. The 2 generals led their troops across the passes of the Rhodope Mountains in constant fear of an ambush. When they unexpectedly heard the sounds of the horns of shepherds and swineherds, they retreated in a panic, abandoning their baggage. The fiasco outraged Theodore, and he ordered them to hurry to his camp at Adrianople, but both commanders disobeyed. A Bulgarian renegade in Nicaean service, Dragotas, switched sides and laid siege to Melnik in the summer. Theodore hastily departed from Adrianople to lead relief forces to the town. The Bulgarians laid an ambush for him along the Rupel Pass, but he avoided it, and Dragotas abandoned the siege on Theodore's arrival. From Melnik, Theodore went to Thessalonica and dismissed his old opponent, Phils, from the governorship. He closed down the local mint, because he wanted to establish a centralized system of financial administration in Asia Minor, with a new treasury at Astritsion on the Asian coast of the Hellespont. Theodore invaded Macedonia, and forced the Bulgarian garrison in Velz to surrender, but drought prevented him from continuing the military campaign across the arid of Pearl. He went to Saras, where he confirmed the fiscal privileges of the Macedonian towns. He also ordered the arrest of Constantine Cabasilas, Archbishop of Ohrid, assuming that Cabasilas was Michael II of Epirus' loyal supporter. A report of a Mongol invasion of Asia Minor forced Theodore to leave Macedonia in late autumn of 1255. After the report had proved false, he launched an attack against the fortress of Sepana. He had to abandon the campaign, because his army could not pass across the narrow and frosty mountain passes. He returned to Anatolia around the end of the year. He showered his confidants with honors and gifts. He made Manuel Laskaris and Constantine Margarites the commanders-in-chief of his troops in Thrace, and charged George Mausolon with implementing military reforms. In parallel, he turned against members of the old aristocratic families, whom he distrusted. Constantine Strategopoulos and Theodore Phils, two aristocrats who had offended him, were blinded. Alexius Strategopoulos and Alexius Raoul's 4 sons were imprisoned. Theodore's cousin, Michael Palaiologos, fled to the Seljuks to escape imprisonment. Theodore took advantage of the emperor's right to control aristocratic marriages to establish family ties between his lowborn favorites and the old aristocracy. George Mausolon married Palaiologos' niece, Theodora Canticus in Palaiologina, and Andronikos Mausolon wed a daughter of Alexius Raoul. Theodore decided to resume negotiations about a church union between the Orthodox Nicene and the Catholic churches, with Pope Alexander IV, reigned 1254–1261, and sent envoys to Rome in April or May 1256. Divergent views on the procession of the Holy Spirit had always been an important cause of the schism between the two churches. Orthodox theologians maintained that the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father alone, but Catholic theologians stated that the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father and the Son. Theodore commissioned Blemmeds to summarize the Orthodox position. Blemmeds adopted a conciliatory approach, concluding that a statement about the procession of the Holy Spirit from the Father through the Son was fully in conformity with the Bible and the Church Fathers' works. Theodore did not accept his tutor's view, and insisted on the traditional Orthodox doctrine. Michael II of Bulgaria dispatched Cuman raiders to plunder Thrace early in 1256. Although Theodore had instructed Laskaris and Margarites to adopt a defensive strategy, they pursued the Cumans, but the invaders inflicted a heavy defeat on their troops. Theodore assembled a new army, partially mustered among the Anatolian peasantry, and crossed the Hellespont. He sent troops, including Cuman horsemen in his service, against the invaders, and they routed the enemy forces in 2 battles in Thrace. He entered into peace negotiations with Michael II with the mediation of Rostislav Mikhailovic, Duke of Maxo, reigned 1254–1262. Michael II had recently married Rostislav's daughter, and Rostislav's wife, Anna of Hungary, was Theodore's cousin. Rostislav came to Thrace to reach an agreement with Theodore. Acropolites drafted a treaty about the restoration of the pre-war boundaries between Nicaea and Bulgaria. Rostislav accepted it and signed the peace treaty on Michael II's behalf on the 29th of June. The treaty prescribed that Michael II cede Sepana to the Nicaeans, but the Bulgarian garrison was not withdrawn immediately from the fortress. Theodore became convinced that Rostislav had deceived him and ordered the public whipping of Acropolites. His act proved imprudent, because the Bulgarians ceded the fortress in early September. Theodore sent George Mausolon to Acropolites to seek a reconciliation. The peace treaty aroused much indignation in Bulgaria, enabling Michael II's cousin, Kaliman, reigned 1256, to stage a plot and dethrone the Tsar. Kaliman seized the throne, but he never gained the support of the army. After Kaliman fell victim to a new plot, Rostislav Mikhailovic and Michael II's brother-in-law, Mitso, reigned 1256–1257, laid claim to the throne. Most boyars, noblemen, preferred a third candidate, one of their number, Constantine T, reigned 1257 to 1277, although he was not related to the ruling Asen dynasty. Ruins of the Byzantine fortification around Dyrrhachium, now Durrës in Albania. Theodore's war against Bulgaria brought about a rapprochement between Epirus and Serbia. Michael II of Epirus made a formal alliance with Stefan Euro I, King of Serbia, reigned 1243 to 1276. He also sent gifts to the Albanian chiefs who had acknowledged Nicaean suzerainty to gain their support. Theodore's daughter, Maria, and Michael II's son and heir, Nicephorus, reigned 1266 or 68 to 1296 or 98, had been engaged during Vatatzes' reign. After making peace with the Bulgarians, Theodore ordered Michael II to send Nicephorus to Thessalonica to wed Maria. Nicephorus was accompanied by his mother, Theodora Petrolifina. Theodore took her into custody, only allowing her to return to Epirus after Michael II ceded Servia and Dyrrhachium to him. The possession of the two towns secured the Nicaean control of the Via Egnatia, but Michael II remained hostile to Theodore. Theodore received the papal legate, Bishop Constantine of Orfito, in Thessalonica. Their negotiations about the church union and a new ecumenical council, a general assembly of Orthodox and Catholic bishops, proved fruitless, because the legate's authorization to make concessions was limited and Theodore was unwilling to make theological concessions. He also preserved the right to convoke the Orthodox bishops to a synod to discuss the conditions of the union. Theodore maintained a correspondence with the Holy See, but he did not initiate new negotiations with it. The Mongols invaded Asia Minor and defeated Caicos II on the 14th of October, 1256. Theodore hurried back to Anatolia to oversee the preparations for its defense. Caicos sought asylum in Nicaea, and the Mongols installed his brother, Kilij Arslan IV, reigned 1246 or 49 to 1266, as the new Sultan of Rum. Theodore assembled his troops on the plains near Magnesia. The Mongol ruler of Persia, the Ilkhan Hulagu, reigned 1256 to 1265, sent a delegation to Theodore to begin negotiations about Caicos' future. Hulagu agreed to withdraw his army from Rum, and ordered the division of the Sultanate between Caicos and Kilij Arslan in the spring of 1257. Before leaving for Rum, Caicos ceded 4 fortresses in the valley of the river Lycus to Nicaea in return for a contingent of 300 auxiliary troops. His achievements made Theodore self-confident. He proudly stated that his empire included territories as far as Dyrrhachium on the Adriatic Sea and Cape Carambas on the Black Sea. His success during the war against Bulgaria had convinced him he should recruit soldiers from among Anatolian peasants. In a letter to Blemides, he stated that the native Hellenes were more reliable than foreign mercenaries. The restored Byzantine Empire, at the beginning of Michael VIII Palaiologos' rule, 1265, most European territories had been seized by Theodore's father between 1246 and 1254. Theodore fell seriously ill in November, 1257. George Passionairs, who was less than 16 years old at the time, would diagnose his illness as epilepsy, mentioning that Theodore had often lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. Passionairs also described Theodore's unusual appointments and his attempts to forge marriage alliances between aristocrats and commoners as symptoms of his disease. Acropolites only noticed extreme weight loss, reducing Theodore's entire body to a skeleton. Blemides described Theodore's illness as a scourge and a strange disease, also mentioning Theodore's melancholy and phobias. Theodore himself wrote of insufferable aching and paralysis in the arms. Modern historians of diseases have not agreed on a diagnosis of Theodore's illness. The medical historian John Laskaris and the neurologist Panagiotis maintain that Passionaire's diagnosis was correct, concluding that Theodore developed epilepsy of the tonic-clonic type in his late 20s. The historian Donald M. Nichol proposes that Theodore's illness made him the prey of his moods, and he compensated for his nervousness by an autocratic and obstinate temper. The medical historian Georgios Makris concludes in his 1995 study on epilepsy in the Byzantine Empire that Theodore did not have epilepsy. The historian Dimitar Angelov, who does not accept Passionaire's diagnosis, proposes that Theodore's symptoms, fits, and loss of balance indicate that he had cancer of the brain, the spine, or the lungs. Theodore's illness prevented him from commanding his troops in person. The commanders of the army in Macedonia, most of them of humble origin, recently appointed by Theodore, could not prevent the Epirites, Albanians, and Serbians from raiding Nicaean territories. Stefan Euro I defeated the Nicaean troops near Prilep. Michael II's sister-in-law, Maria Petrolifina, entered into a correspondence with Theodore's commander, Constantine Chebron, making him believe that she was eager to marry him, but Chebron was captured during their meeting. Theodore's newly assembled army of Anatolian peasants was routed at Edessa. Michael Palaiologos, who had been allowed to return from his exile, led a new army to Macedonia. He defeated the Epirites, but Theodore ordered him to return instead of marching to Prilep. Palaiologos' withdrawal enabled Michael II to seize Prilep and capture Acropolites, who was its governor. Michael II was planning to launch an attack against Thessalonica, but Manfred of Sicily renewed his predecessor's claim to Byzantine territories in the Balkans and invaded Epirus from the west. Michael II, who did not want to abandon his plan, concluded an alliance with Manfred, who expelled the Nicaean garrisons from Dyrrhachium and other fortresses on the Adriatic by the end of February 1258. Constantine T of Bulgaria repudiated his first wife and sued for the hand of Theodore's eldest daughter, Irene. He knew that his marriage to Irene, who was Tsar Ivan II's granddaughter, could strengthen his claim to rule. Theodore wanted to confirm his peace treaty with Bulgaria and accepted Constantine T's offer. Irene went to Bulgaria to marry Constantine T. Theodore rarely left his palace at Magnesia during the last months of his life. He was convinced that sorcery caused his illness and accused his courtiers of casting spells on him, sending many of them for trial. Michael Palaiologos' sister, Maria Martha, was the most famous victim of Theodore's paranoia. Theodore had forced her daughter, Theodora, to marry the elderly Basil Caballerios, but the marriage was never consummated. After Caballerios had attributed his impotence to his mother-in-law's spells, Theodore had her put into a sack filled with cats that tore her flesh. She was only released because Theodore suddenly panicked, fearing her spells. Also fearing her brother's revenge, Theodore had Michael Palaiologos imprisoned on charges of poisoning, but soon set him free. The dying emperor named his 7-year-old son, John, reigned 1254 to 1261, as his sole heir, appointing George Mausolon regent until John came of age. Theodore became a monk, but he kept his baptismal name. He summarized his sins in a treatise, and asked the Patriarchal Synod to grant him absolution. He died in the imperial palace at Magnesia on the 16th of August, 1258. He was buried next to his father in the Sosandra monastery on Mount Sipylus. His grave and the monastery were destroyed after the Turkish conquest of the region in the 14th century. The aristocrats had taken an oath of loyalty to Mausolon at Theodore's deathbed, but they soon began conspiring against him. In 10 days, Mausolon was murdered, and Michael Palaiologos assumed the regency for the child emperor, John IV Laskaris. Palaiologos convinced the aristocrats that an empire ruled by a boy could not resist enemy attacks, and he was proclaimed co-emperor as Michael VIII, reigned 1259 to 1282, before the end of the year. When Michael VIII and John IV were crowned together early in 1259, the patriarch put the crown first on Michael VIII's head. After concluding an agreement with Genoa against the Latin Empire, he dispatched Alexius Strategopoulos to spy on the defenses of Constantinople. Taking advantage of the absence of the bulk of the Latin army, Strategopoulos seized Constantinople by a surprise attack on the 25th of July, 1261. Michael VIII was crowned for the second time, alone, in the Hagia Sophia. The child John IV was blinded on the 25th of December, 1261, which prevented him from ruling. To emphasize that the Laskaris family had lost their imperial status, Michael VIII married off John's three sisters to minor Italian and Bulgarian noblemen. A man of letters devoted to philosophical and theological studies, Theodore transformed his court into a center for renowned scholars shortly after his accession to the throne. He ordered that books which he and his father had collected in urban libraries be made available to all who wanted to read them. During his father's lifetime, he began to write treatises on philosophical, theological and historical subjects, but decided to prepare manuscript editions of his works only after his meeting with Berthold of Hohenberg in 1253. They were collected in 4 codices, but only 3 survived. Theodore's Satire of the Tutor, written most likely in 1240, is his earliest extant work. The satire is dedicated to his principal tutor, portraying him as an undereducated and rude man, who learned magic while staying in Bulgaria. He also wrote Encomia in praise of the citizens of Nicaea, his father and Acropolites. Theodore's theological works, including his first oration against the Latins, or, on the procession of the Holy Spirit, and his treatise on the Trinity, demonstrate his adherence to Orthodox theology. Theodore's great supplicatory canon to Our Lady, a supplicatory canon to the Virgin Mary, is his best-known work. He composed it just months before his death, and it is still sung in Orthodox ceremonies. Neither Theodore nor Elena had reached the minimum legal age of marriage, 14 for boys and 12 for girls, when they were married, but such an early marriage was not unique among Nicaean aristocrats and commoners. The wedding took place at Lampsakos in early 1235. Years later, Theodore described Elena as the flower of his youth, and stated that their bond of incomparable love made them happier than all people. She gave birth to 4 or 5 daughters, and 1 son. Their children were Irene, who married Constantine Tic of Bulgaria, was Emperor Michael VIII's implacable enemy until her death around 1270. Maria, who married Nicephorus I of Epirus, deceased between early in 1257 and 1265. Theodora was married off by Michael VIII to a Mariate nobleman, Magos Debilikatos, according to Passionaires, and Nicephorus Grigoras. The historian Albert Fehler identifies him as Matthew of Mons, who held the barony of Ligasti in the Principality of Achaea. Eudoxia first married Count William Peter of Ventimiglia, who died around 1280. Her second husband, Roger Arnau, Count of Pillars, died in 1288. The widowed Eudoxia had a love affair with the Aragonese Admiral Bernat de Seria. She died in 1309. A Bulgarian boyar, despot Jacob Svetoslav, married Theodore's unnamed daughter, according to Passionaires. She may have been Theodore's illegitimate daughter, because other Byzantine historians failed to mention her. Theodore's only son, John, survived his mutilation, but he spent the rest of his life in prison. He died around 1309. In regards to Theodore's family, and his relationship to Byzantine imperial families, here are the houses, generations, and members of the generations. The houses are Angelo, Komnenoi, and Doukai. In the first generation, there was Alexius I Komnenos, born circa 1048, died 1118, Byzantine emperor, reigned 1081 to 1118. Irene Doukaina, born circa 1066, died 1138. In the second generation, there was Constantine Angelos, born circa 1093, died before 1185. Theodora. In the third generation there was Andronikos Doukas Angelos, born circa 1133, died before 1185. Isaac Angelos Doukas. In the fourth generation, there was Alexius III Angelos, born circa 1153, died 1211, Byzantine emperor, reigned 1195 to 1203. In the fifth generation there was Alexius Palaiologos, died before 1204, despot. Irene. Anna, died before 1213. Theodore I Laskaris, born circa 1175, died 1221, emperor of Nicaea, reigned 1205 to 1221. Daughter. Basil Vatatzes, died early 1190, Dowes. In the sixth generation, there was Theodora. Andronikos Palaiologos, Megas Domestikos. Irene, died 1239. John III Doukas Vatatzes, born 1192, died 1254, emperor of Nicaea, reigned 1221 to 1254. Isaac Doukas, Sebastocrator. Son. In the seventh generation, there was Maria Martha. Irene. Michael VIII Palaiologos, born 1223, died 1282, Byzantine emperor, reigned 1261 to 1282. Elena of Bulgaria, born 1223, died 1252. Theodore II Laskaris, born 1221 or 22, died 1258, emperor of Nicaea, reigned 1254 to 1258. John Doukas. Daughter. Alexius Raoul, died circa 1258, Protovestiarios. In the eighth generation, there was Basil Caballerios. Theodora. George Mauzolon, died 1258, regent for John IV Laskaris. Theodora, born circa 1240, died 1303. Andronikos Mauzolon, died 1258, Megas Domestikos. Daughter. Between the 8th and 9th generation, the Palaiologo house was introduced. In the 9th generation, there was Constantine T, died 1277, Tsar of Bulgaria, reigned 1257 to 1277. Irene, died 1270. Nicephorus I, born circa 1240, died circa 1297, ruler of Epirus, reigned 1266 or 68 to circa 1297. Maria, died before 1268. Matthew of Mons, Baron of Villagasti. Theodora. William Peter, died circa 1280, Count of Ventimiglia. Eudoxia, died 1309. Roger Arnau, died 1288, Count of Pillars. Jacob Svetoslav, died 1275 or 77, despot in Bulgaria. Daughter. John IV Laskaris, born 1250, died circa 1209, emperor of Nicaea, reigned 1258 to 1261. In the 10th generation, there was Counts Laskaris di Ventimiglia.